Hey everyone, welcome to Singularity Beast II Build Log Part 12. Now this is when it really begins. In this video I'm going to start pulling apart the system and cleaning all of the components ready to be rebuilt with all of the new components. At the end of the last video I mentioned that I was probably going to repeat the process of draining the loop and filling it with laboratory grade distilled water. Now I actually just finished doing that a few hours ago. It's been up and running again and the coolant is definitely a lot more diluted now, so this is the last time I'm going to do that. Okay, I'm still waiting on a few parts, but these are the components that have arrived since the last video. This is the Aquero 5 Pro and also a number of other components to go with it. And this is what I'm going to be using to monitor and control my water cooling loop, specifically my fans. Now the reason that I'm using this is because I recently had a subscriber make a video for me about this, and he took me around his build. He showed me the functionality of the Aquero in detail, and he was one person who really understands the motives behind my videos and my channel and the importance of sharing our knowledge. So to show his gratitude for my videos, the information that I've shared, he also shared some information with me in return. And to show my gratitude, and also because this is an interesting product, I have decided to use it in Singularity Beast II. So thank you, Eric, and I hope you enjoy this build. Okay, I'm just about to get started. I've just powered down Singularity Beast II. It's unusual to have that system powered down, but I'm just about to start draining the water cooling loop. I have all of the components laid out here ready to go, although I might actually have to move some of them out of the way because this is where I'm going to be installing the water blocks on the motherboard and doing a bunch of other things. Okay, now about the tubing that I'm going to use in the build. I decided a fair while back, but I have here a number of different brands, and before I tell you what's what, I want you to pick which tubing looks the best from back here. Okay, now this is Master Clear UV blue tubing. So it's clear tubing, but it glows blue under a UV light. And you can see that it's not very transparent. It has a blue tinge to it, but that's fair enough because it is clear UV blue tubing. Now this is Primo Chill PrimoFlex Pro LRT clear tubing, and it is not very transparent at all. I would say that it's very cloudy. It's got a very strong blue tinge to it. I mean, just try to look through it and see something on the other side. Those EK water block boxes there, and then when you look through the Master Clear, you know, it is a lot easier to see through it. Now this is Tygon tubing. It's the 3603, and I think that compared to the other two, it just looks amazing. It's nice and clear, transparent. It doesn't have any cloudiness, well, not very much. It doesn't have a visible color tinge. It's definitely the tubing that I'm going to go with. Okay, as you can see, I'm just getting started. So I'm starting by unplugging all of the wiring from the motherboard. I'm then going to undo the two quick disconnects around this side of the build, and after that I'll be able to remove the motherboard tray from the case. This makes things really easy because it's very quick to remove the motherboard tray from the case, and I can then work on what's left behind in the case, or remove all of the old wiring, ready to start again with the wiring, flush out the water cooling system, install the new fans, and I can work on the motherboard separately, swap over the CPU water block, install all of the motherboard water blocks, the memory water blocks, and then tube everything up. So as you can see, I just undid the two quick disconnects, and I'm now removing the motherboard tray from the back of the case. So you can see all of the wiring is a mess. I'll be definitely starting again from scratch with the wiring. So there it is, about 5 minutes work, and the motherboard, the graphics cards and all of the rest of it have been removed. and that is thanks to the 2 quick disconnects that I have placed around the front of the build. So now I'm going to drain the rest of the water cooling loop. Then I'm going to continue dismantling the rest of the build, and I've decided that I'm going to completely remove everything from the inside of the case, right down to the radiators, even all of the case panels that I possibly can, because I want to dust clean everything and also properly flush the water cooling loop. This case is just so easy to work on. It has things such as quick release hinges for the side panels. So all you need to do to remove them is lift them up. The top panel pops off, and so does the front panel. The case actually has a modular design, and there is all these different accessories that you can buy from Case Labs to completely change the design of the case, and that is actually something that I'm going to do during this build. I'm going to change around a lot of the configuration of the case. Now, this part of the water cooling loop is actually still full, so the first thing I will need to do is obviously drain this part of the loop. Now, I'm actually really looking forward to taking a look at these graphics card water blocks, because these water blocks have the old EK nickel plating. They don't have the EN electrolysis nickel plating, which EK released to fix the problems that people were reporting with corrosion of their nickel plating. Now, I'm going to put a link in the video description to an internal investigation that EK did on their water blocks to find out why this corrosion and staining was happening to their nickel plating. Now, they used a number of different coolants. They used distilled water on its own, distilled water with a bias side, and also pre-mixed coolant, a few other things, and they actually tested their old nickel plating and also their new EN nickel plating. Now, what they found was that pre-mixed coolant, which has corrosion inhibitors and also biocides, achieved the best results. Absolutely no staining, no corrosion whatsoever. But everything else had some degree of corrosion and or staining, and the worst of all of them was distilled water on its own. Now, I'm actually going to talk a lot more about this during this build log, and also in an upcoming review that I have on Mayhem's coolant. There seems to be a lot of confusion and misconceptions surrounding coolant and what is needed to run a healthy water cooling loop. Okay, I've skipped a few steps here. I've removed the memory and graphics cards from the motherboard, and as you can see, I've installed the EK Supremacy, and I'm actually quite impressed with the way it looks. I knew it would grow on me, and it is certainly starting to. I think it will look a lot better once it's in the build. There's coolant running through it, you know, there's some lighting. I think it's really going to blend in nicely. Okay, now for a look at the EK Supremacy. I have a separate review on this water block. Click on the link on the screen to check it out. EK has made some big changes to their products recently. They have released a whole bunch of new water blocks, reservoirs, etc. They have also completely changed their aesthetics to this new CSQ circle square design. And from what I've seen and heard of people's opinions, this new design has been quite controversial. There are a lot of people who don't like it and just prefer EK's water blocks the way they were. And I was one of those people to begin with. I mean, I've always loved the aesthetics of EK's water blocks, and when I saw this new design, I was actually quite shocked, but I did think that it might grow on me. And I must say that compared to the original photos that I saw of the new CSQ design, seeing this water block, the EK Supremacy, in real life, it definitely looks a lot better than I thought. Okay, now for a quick look around the water block. Here you can see an EK logo stamped into a piece of metal and seated into the top of the water block. I think this is a great touch. It just looks amazing. On the left hand side is the inlet, and on the right the outlet. This is important because of the way the water block is designed. Now, this is actually the nickel plexi version of the water block, so it has a plexi top and a nickel-plated copper base. There is 4 versions of the water block. There is also the nickel acetal and then the copper plexi and copper acetal. So it's the same 4 versions that EK often has with their water blocks. Now you can see that the top of this water block is frosted, which is new, and I think this looks amazing. It will look even better in combination with lighting and once there's coolant flowing through the water block. You can see Supremacy written on the side of the block, and there is 2 3mm LED holes drilled into the opposite side. Now the frosting on the top of the water block also hides the internals. Okay, now for a look at the base of the water block. Now I have handled it previously, so there is a lot of finger marks, but you can still see the awesome mirror finish of the nickel plated copper cold plate. Now you can see the bolt heads with the EK Supreme HF. These were actually at the top, so it's good to see them hidden under the base. Now EK has achieved some significant performance increases with this water block. A 20% increase in flow and a 2-degree decrease in temperatures. The water block actually comes included with 2 extra jet plates. One of them is optimized for socket 1155 CPUs and the other is optimized for socket 2011 CPUs. So I thought this was an interesting addition. And in my review I actually have a guide on how to swap the jet plates. Okay, so this is a very quick summary of what it takes to install a motherboard water block. I've just removed the stock cooling off the motherboard. I'm cleaning the thermal interface material off the motherboard. I then installed new thermal interface material and I then installed the water blocks. Click on the link on the screen for my motherboard water block installation guide. Okay, I've finished installing the motherboard water blocks. And now for a look at what this configuration looks like without the memory water blocks installed, because I've decided that I am definitely going to be installing the memory water blocks. I certainly do agree that Corsair dominated GT memory modules look awesome, but personally I would prefer more water blocks, mainly when combined with BitsPower Crystal Link. Okay, the memory water blocks are installed. And I've also removed the EKFC bridge from the graphics cards. So I can now take a good look at those graphics card water blocks to check the condition that they are in. But before that, I'm going to give you a look at the motherboard and all of these water blocks. 5 water blocks in extremely close vicinity that I am soon going to start tubing up with BitsPower Crystal Link. Now you can see that I actually have the memory water blocks centered, but it turns out I don't leave them like that because it's just not possible when they are that close together. So I actually have to end up pushing them right out as far as they will go towards the outsides of the motherboard. But I just think this configuration looks incredible. I would prefer to see nice nickel-plated transparent water blocks with Mayhem's coolant flowing through them, lit up by LEDs, to ugly PCB any day. Even if it's nice black PCB, any PCB is ugly compared to this. The EK Supremacy, you know, I really thought that the new circle square design was going to stick out and look ugly, mainly when combined with the, you know, water blocks of the old EK aesthetics, but it just looks amazing. It blends in perfectly. I think also because it's in the middle of all of the other water blocks, it doesn't actually matter that it's different. And the frosting looks amazing. I would love to have that same frosting on all of the water blocks. So now the next step is to tube up all of the water blocks on the motherboard with BitsPower Crystal Link. But in the meantime, I'm going to take a good look at these graphics card water blocks. Now I haven't cleaned them yet. As you can see, there is still a bit of coolant in these water blocks. I haven't flushed them out since I removed them from the system. Most of you should know that these graphics cards are Gainwood Phantom GTX 580 3GB editions, and the water blocks are EK FC5XO-GW nickel plexi, and they are for the non-reference PCB GTX 580s with 3 GB of memory. Okay, now what you can see there is actually just air bubbles between the coolant. Now remember, as I mentioned, these water blocks have the original EK nickel plating, and all 3 water blocks have absolutely no imperfections whatsoever. There's certainly no corrosion, not even any staining, and there's not even any staining from the UV red coolant. And now this is actually a little experiment that I did. I haven't talked about it yet. I actually ran Fezzer Red UV coolant, and it's been about 6 months, and I did this purely to show the result because I have been having a discussion with some of my subscribers about pre-mixed coolants for some time now, and it's a perfect result all round. No clogging, staining, corrosion, no problems of any kind. Okay, as you can see, I've started tubing up the water blocks on the motherboard. Now, one thing that was important for me with this was to make sure that it looked different to Nighthawk, the most recent build that I did, because Nighthawk had a similar configuration. Same motherboard, almost exactly the same 5 water blocks in extremely close vicinity, very similar configuration. So the only way I was going to make this look different was to use a different tubing routing. And the good thing is, being a different case, having a different tubing routing was necessary anyway, because the radiator is actually above the motherboard, so the first tube is going to come in from the top. As you can see, I have that 90-degree dual rotary pointing out to the top left-hand side there. That is where the tubing is going to come into this configuration. Now, because of the different tubing routing, it means that I need to use different fittings, which is again going to give a completely different aesthetic. And what I have decided to do this time is actually add some more curves to the configuration, and the way I'm going to do this is by using more 90-degree dual rotary fittings instead of single rotary fittings. Okay, now after I used Bits Power Crystal Link in Nighthawk to tube up the water blocks, I had a lot of questions about it because it was really something that people hadn't seen before, something new. And I had a lot of people asking me what fittings, exact fittings that I use, you know, how do you do it? So basically I'm going to let you watch me setting this up, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the fittings. Now, to begin with, it is a process of trial and error because there's really no way you can get the exact measurements of the heights of all of the water blocks, the thicknesses. The heights of the components on the motherboard will actually vary slightly anyway. The heights is what is most important. If you don't get the heights exactly right, then the Bits Power Crystal Link fittings are actually going to leak because the tubing goes into them on an angle, and it also looks horrible. It puts pressure on all of the fittings and the water blocks, so you have to get the heights absolutely perfect. Now, the lengths actually don't matter so much because there is a lot of things that you can do to change the lengths. What I'm actually talking about with the heights and the lengths is the heights of the water blocks and also the distances between them. So when it comes to the lengths, there is a lot of different Crystal Link fittings. Now, the Crystal Link fittings themselves are actually designed for multiple GPU water cooling configurations. So they come in different PCIe slot widths. So they come in 2 slot, 3 slot, 4 slot, and 5 slot. And each set actually has 3 different sized Crystal Link fittings. And I think the actual differences between all of the lengths is 5 millimeters. So there is a lot of different sizes to choose from, pretty much a Crystal Link fitting for everything. But if you can't find the right size Crystal Link fitting, there is a number of other things that you can do. You can use extension fittings in behind the multi-link fittings, and that adds a whole lot more different sizes. Now the multi-link fittings are the fittings that the Bits Power Crystal Link actually fits into, and there's 2 different sizes of these as well. There's the normal ones which have 2 O-rings inside of them, And then there's the mini, which you can see me using here, which have a single O-ring inside of them, so that they don't allow for much leeway. Now, when it comes to the heights, the fittings that you need there are extension fittings of different lengths. So the ones that I normally use, I use a lot of multi-transfer couplers, which are basically just a 5mm extension fitting. And then 15mm, 20mm, 25mm, and 30mm. If you get yourself a whole bunch of those, then you're not going to have any trouble setting up a configuration like this. And as I said, it is a process of trial and error. There is no way of figuring out the exact heights of all of the water blocks on your motherboard. It's also impossible to figure out the distances between your water blocks. Then if you throw in different components, it's going to completely change all of the fittings that you need again. And even if you change the tubing routing, as I said, I'm using a slightly different tubing routing in this build compared to Nighthawk, and it means that I need to use completely different fittings from the ground up. Now, when it comes to actually setting the configuration up, so once you have all of your fittings figured out, you can see how I'm actually figuring out which fittings I need. With the extension fittings, I can actually see that by eye, so I just look at the height and I know straight away which extension fitting I need. But with the Bits Power Crystal Link fittings, it's a little bit more difficult to see, so I just go through and basically grab a Crystal Link fitting and check if it fits. If it doesn't, I'd try the next one. Now, you might be thinking, and it might be sounding like you need to have a massive collection of fittings to be able to set up a configuration like this, but if you plan things out properly, it doesn't have to be the case. I only go through a select amount of my fittings when I set up a config like this. Okay, I have completed the Bits Power Crystal Link configuration between the water blocks on the motherboard, and I think it just looks incredible. You know, Bits Power Crystal Link looks amazing between graphics card water blocks where it's meant to be used, and it looks even better where it's not meant to be used. The black sparkle fittings, as always, look amazing. I say this all the time, but Bits Power black sparkle fittings are definitely my favorite. And combined with EK nickel plexi water blocks, they just go perfectly because they combine all of the black in a build, of which there is often a lot of black. They combine the black with the silver of the nickel plated water blocks. So it's nice to have components that have an aesthetic that is somewhere between other components to kind of blend everything in. And I've also mentioned this, but the EK supremacy is just looking better and better with this configuration as it develops. And I think it's only going to improve when there's coolant flowing through the loop and also LEDs in all of these water blocks. I think that the EK supremacy is going to give the nicest aesthetic because unlike all of the other water blocks, it's going to have a nice soft glow thanks to the frosting on the surface. So I'm just taking a look at a different angle here to show you that I have all of the fittings completely level. There is not even the slightest difference between the levels of these fittings. I got it perfectly on every single one, so I was really happy with that. Everything is perfectly level and lined up because, as I mentioned, this is one of the most challenging things about a configuration like this. The other thing that I'm really happy with is the tubing routing. If you want to build a clean water cooling loop, there is 2 rules that you should stick to, as well as doing a number of other things. Never cross tubing, so you need to go around in a big circle. Not an exact circle, what I mean is just no crossing tubing. And the other rule is that you need to take the shortest route between all of your components. And component order doesn't matter because the performance difference that component order is going to make is negligible. So I have achieved both of those things with this configuration, and the other thing is that it is completely different to the configuration in Nighthawk. Different tubing routing, different fittings. The components might be the same, but that is because I almost always use the same components in my builds, because I strictly only use components that I have personally tested and that have a perfect track record for me. Okay, I'm going to have to leave this part of the build log here. The next part of the build log will follow directly on. I install the graphics cards and also use BitsPower Crystal Link between the graphics card water blocks. I then start on the case, stripping all of the components out, cleaning everything, flushing the rest of the water cooling loop. So there is so much more to come. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like and favorite if you want to see more.